Okay, in this section we're going to be looking at exploring non-Mendelian genetics. All right, so this is genetics that goes a little further than Mendel did, and of course this refers to Chapter 11, Section 3 in your textbook. All right, so let's look at the complexity of inheritance, because I'm sure you realize there's a lot of complex traits out there that people have. The phenotypes that we see are completely different. So Mendel, he studied simple characteristics in pea plants, and he was able to define some basic principles behind their inheritance patterns. So he was able to experiment scientifically and figure out, how they inherited those traits. But there were many characteristics that visible organisms have and more complex inheritance patterns than Mendel had studied. And he, obviously never reached the goal of figuring out those inheritance patterns of these more complex features, these characteristics. So let's take a look at these non-Mendelian types of characteristics. And the first one we'll look at here is incomplete dominance. All right, you can see here that neither allele is dominant over the other. Therefore, the heterozygous phenotype is an intermediate or a blend of the two homozygous phenotypes. For instance, if we have white and red here in the case of these flowers, all of them, neither one dominates over the other, so we have what is known as something that is blended. And of course, red and white would turn out to be pink, as you can see here. All right. Codominance is on the opposite end of the spectrum. Both alleles are visible in the heterozygous phenotype, and the example of this would be a roan horse. Okay, if you have a red and white hairs, both of them are dominant, and when they are crossed, when you have two homozygous for either one of those particular traits, the heterozygous is going to be a really, both will be expressed. It's not a mix, it's not a blend. All right, if you actually look at a roan horse, they're going to have red and white hairs protruding through, so both will dominate there. There's also multiple alleles as well too, and that's where there are more than two alleles in the population. All right, example is blood type. All right, we have type A blood, type B blood, and type O blood, as you can see here. So the genotypes for this, if you have two A's, for example, two A genes, or an A and an O, as represented by the strange looking, the little I here represents that. That's going to give you A blood type. B would be two B's, or a B and an O. Now, if you have A and B, once again, you're at a codominant situation where you have AB blood type, and the recessive here would be O. All right, and of course, you would need two of those O's in order for that to happen. Coat color in rabbits is also an example of multiple alleles, as you can see here. If we look at the possible genotypes, dark gray is the most dominant. All right, you have the different ones here. Chinchilla is another color, light gray, Himalayan, and of course albino. And this one, of course, would be the complete recessive here. Polygenic inheritance, as you mentioned, many, in genetic genes, many genes, all right, means that you have two or more genes that control a trait. And we have an example here of parrots off to the side, and the more genes that control a trait, the more variation you're going to have in the phenotypes. For example, the feather-colored parakeets that we have over here. As you can see for the green, whether it's homozygous dominant or heterozygous, if you end up with any one of those combinations, homozygous dominant here, you can see a heterozygous and a homozygous dominant. You can see a homozygous dominant and a heterozygous, or you can see heterozygous on both. You're going to end up with green. Now, if you end up with homozygous or heterozygous dominant for the blue, but the yellow is recessive, you're going to end up with a blue parakeet. And vice versa, if you have homozygous recessive for the blue and homozygous dominant or heterozygous for the yellow, you're going to end up with yellow. But if you have both recessives for blue, homozygous recessive for blue and yellow, you're going to end up with a white parakeet. In humans, height, eye color, skin color are all examples of polygenic inheritance. There are multiple genes that control those traits being expressed. And there are also environmental influences too. And I know you guys saw this on a previous test that we had, the Himalayan rabbit. And of course with the ice pack on the back, if you remember that question that was on the short answer, there's a reason why this area is darkened here. All right, and it's environmental factors. In the case of the Himalayan rabbit here, it's temperature. Those are the areas that can get extremely cold because of minimal blood flow. So the black coloring will help absorb light, which is going to, because it's black is the absence of color, and it's going to absorb all the spectrum of light, which will make those areas warmer. Sun exposure can also change things. Altitude, diet, exercise. There are many different environmental influences, and they can have a significant effect on the phenotypes of certain organisms. In general, though, the product of a genotype is not typically a defined phenotype, but it's rather a range of possibilities influenced by the environment. All right. Okay, are there any questions or anything? Make sure you write them down, and we'll take a look at them. All right, have a good day, guys.